Peace and blessings, everybody. Shalom, and welcome to Universal God, Message of Peace. I'm Lale Tunson. This is Rabbi Lee Wiseman. And today, this week, we're going to be talking about the topic of lust. So, how can we transform our lust? Rabbi Wiseman will answer this question. Over
Okay.
to you, Rabbi
So
Wiseman.
I will say that I was very hesitant to approach this topic, but I think it's an important topic. It's one that I think all human beings struggle with at one time or another, and that it's also you don't want to run away from big questions. Uh, I think one of the failings of religion sometimes is that we're afraid of big questions, but this is obviously a big question, an important one. So the first thing I think is to understand, the kind of centrality of sexuality in human life. I mean, the power to create life is an amazing power. And while other animals, while other animals create life by instinct, right? We create life by decision. We create life by forming a relationship, and that makes our creation something completely different, and also makes it in some sense, an imitation of God's creation, right? God also willed, right, the creation of man into being. And so we have been given the power, we have been given the power to control our creative urge. And that's a tremendous power. It has within it um, an incredible potential that can be wasted or can be used. That's, I think, the first thing. Second thing is to understand the ways, I think this is a little bit of, a little bit of logic, the ways in which sexuality is so intertwined and so central, so connected to other parts of our being, right? It's connected to our physical being and our physical well-being. It's connected to our psychological well-being, to our attachment styles, to the way that we build relationships. It's attached to our self-esteem. It's attached to a lot of things. It has connections with almost every part of our personality, and that makes it really something which is very central. And if we look at religious teaching, right, there's a lot of emphasis that's placed on how to deal with this, because because also when it's not controlled, right? It can be very destructive, destructive to the family, destructive to the person, destructive to the health, destructive to all those things that I mentioned that it's connected to. It can be very destructive. So, be creative or destructive. It has both of those. It has both of those potentials. Um, so years ago, I remember being very panicked. So I'm a very big student of the teachings of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov talks all the time about what he calls tikkun habrit, or shmirat habrit. So, which means protecting the covenant, by which he means having a proper relationship to sexuality. And he says it's the most important thing. I was terrified. It was like, oh, I mean, how do I know? Like, I'm doing this right? How do I know? So I went to a rabbi, and I asked him, and who was a very big Breslov rabbi, follower of Rabbi Nachman. I said, I'm terrified. Like, what if he said, look, he said, look, the law already contains within it um, the proper vessel for that energy. So he says, listen, the Torah gives you basic laws for how to deal with sexuality. He says, if you're doing that, right, you're already there, right? You're already there. So I think it's, you know, some people feel like they have to have some special, they have to have, some special kind of, they have to be celibate, or they have to, avoid ever thinking about sexuality or something like that. And his answer was, no, it's not really like that. It's that there has to be a vessel for it, and the vessel for it is a marital relationship, right? The vessel that can contain it is a marital relationship that if it's conducted properly, right? If it's conducted properly according to the prophetic guidelines to what it is that's been revealed to us, and the best of our understanding, then that acts as a proper vessel for that energy. So I think that's important. I think that's important to understand that we have pretty good guidelines for how to deal with it. Um, and to be truthful, very often those guidelines have been expanded in various ways, and we have to think carefully about those, right? We do have to think carefully about those, because there are things which are authentic, right? They're authentic. Um, there are things which are revealed to us, and then there are other things which have also become, our custom, right? And may not really help in certain ways. On the contrary, could be even detrimental. So I have to be very kind of careful. Um, but I think also this is from there's a beautiful book. Unfortunately, I don't think it's ever been translated into English, called Reshit Chochmah, The Beginning of Wisdom. It's written in the Middle Ages, late Middle Ages, and it's a kind of book of Kabbalistic advice. It's hard to describe what it is, but it has a section on marriage and sexuality. Um, and one of the things it says is that really a lot of what it's important to understand. It's important to understand the relationship between a man and woman as a primarily spiritual relationship, right? That our physical relationship is really a reflection of a spiritual relationship. And we know this from the very beginning of the Torah, when so Adam meets, right? Adam goes with Eve, right? And it says Adam knew Eve. So very often we understand that as being, kind of euphemistic. Oh, he knew Eve means that he had uh, physical relations with her. He had intimate relations with her. But that's not that's a misreading, because what it's really saying is he knew her, right? He knew her, and part of that knowing, right? Part of that knowing was the intimate relationship. The intimate relationship was not the entirety of the knowing, right? It was not the entirety of the knowing, but it was part of the knowing, right? God put them together, right? God put them together. He married them, right? And then then they came to know each other. And this kind of knowing, right? This kind of knowing called da'at is a very, very deep knowing. And so the goal of intimacy is for people to know each other in a deep way, in a spiritual way. And that there's a certain dynamic between male there's a certain dynamic between male and female. The male is the giver, female is receiver. There are lots of different ways of kind of imagining it. um, we even say kind of at a mystical level, that the woman is like the Shekhinah, the feminine presence of God, so to speak, right? And but to have that in mind, that what you're really having is a spiritual relationship, and that the physical relationship is a manifestation of the spiritual. And by the way, I think it's important to say that this is not just about sexuality. This is about relationship in general, right? We should understand that all relationships are spiritual relationships. That includes our friendships, right? That includes our relationships with our children, right? We're having a spiritual interaction, soul to soul, with other people, and what happens physically is really a reflection of the spiritual reality. When I have a guest and the guest comes to my house and I feed them, right?
Mhm.
That's a physical act, but it's also a spiritual act, right? My soul, so to speak, is giving to their soul. We're kind of in a soul exchange. And when people talk, like we're talking now, that's also an exchange. On one hand, there's something happening in the physical realm, but there's also something happening in the spiritual realm too. And and I think one of the problems in kind of Western civilization has been we've so divorced sexuality from its spiritual roots. Right? We now think of sexuality as a kind of athletic activity, you know, and and that's not at all a religious perspective, not at all an Abrahamic perspective, right? That not to see it as a physical activity, but to see it as a physical activity, which is really a reflection of a spiritual activity, and a reestablishing also of man's original state, right? If you remember that when man was created, it says he was created male and female both. That's
Mhm.
what it says. So the Torah of chapter 1 says created male and female both. So the rabbis trying to imagine this. What does that mean? Said, well, imagine you have a being that has two sides, right? Male on this side, female on this side, and they're back to back. He says the problem there is they can't have a relationship with each other, right? So he was divided into two. It says right, his side was removed, so to speak, right? And now they're able to face each other. Now they're able to have a relationship. So this physical intimacy is really a reestablishing through the zivug or the zawaj, same word, um, of of the original state of man, so that you're really becoming in certain sense like one person, right? There's a kind of complementary relationship between the man and the woman that now reestablishes, right, their. That's why they say even in Jewish law, "Ishto kaguf," a person's wife is just like them, right? And your husband is just like you, right? Because you become, in certain sense, one. You become one entity. Um, so I'm saying, I think did I get everything? Yes. Okay. Now I'll take questions.
Yeah, that was all very beautiful. Thank you so, so much. Um, it's a really big topic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's, I guess, one of those, it's a part of everybody's nature that,
Yeah,
like you
it's
say,
normal.
can be so creative and be hugely destructive. And we see so many divorces, so many people breaking up, relationships falling apart because of, you know, people not being able to control or transform their lust or channel it in the best way possible to create peace. Um, so, how do we what do we do about it? Like, how can we, you're really good at practical tips. How can
Yeah,
people, well, how could, would you, what are the five practical tips you would advise for people to be able to channel their
that's
lust
a good
in
question. I
the
think
right?
that's a good question. I think one thing is to feed yourself. One thing is to feed yourself healthy information on the topic. I think one of the things is that we are kind of flooded. The word that was used by, I forget who it was, somebody wrote a book called Pornified, a kind of about contemporary attitudes about sexuality. And I think so part of it is kind of trying to find perspectives, looking for books, looking for teachers, people who can give you a perspective that's healthy, right? That's healthy, that's going to be able to, kind of inspire you in the right direction. Um, I think that's one thing. Um, Another thing is and I would say this goes with all relationships. This goes with all relationships. And it cannot be restricted to sexuality. Okay? So it has to be kind of all or nothing. Okay? And that is to make your relationships as much as possible I I you relationships instead of I it relationships. So I'll explain. So let's imagine I go to a restaurant. Okay, I go to a restaurant and I order, and I go to this restaurant every single day, and I order 2 eggs, 2 fried eggs, and toast and coffee every day. And the same waitress is there every day, and she comes to my table and I say, I'll have 2 eggs and 2 eggs, and she says, okay. Maybe she doesn't need to do that anymore because she knows. And she brings me my eggs. So, and I pay her and I tip her. I don't know her name. She doesn't know my name. Okay. We have an I-it relationship. Okay. I am an egg consumer and she is an egg provider. Okay. So she's basically a machine to me, right? She just provides my eggs. She provides my breakfast. And me, I provide her with money. Okay. That's our relationship. That's an I-it relationship. There's nothing personal in that relationship. Well, let's say one day I happen to notice that she's looking a little down. And I say, are you okay? And she goes, no. And I say, sit down for a second. Sit down. You have a minute? She says, yeah. And then I say, what's wrong? She says, well, I've been working here. We're working here for 10 years and I have to pay for childcare. And now all of a sudden, our relationship has changed, right? Because now I know her name. Her name is Marie, right? I now know her name is Marie. I now know she has a child. I now know that she's having a bad day, right? And now we're having an I-you relationship. The more you have I-you relationships, the more you're going to have an I-you relationship with other people. And the secret, and really, what we call lust what we call lust is usually when we take the energy of sexuality and we invest it in an I-it relationship, right? When we take that energy and we invest it in something which is a thing to us as opposed to something which is a person to us. So the more you get in the practice the more you get in the practice of treating people as people, the more you're going to be able to treat them, the more you're going to be able to use those impulses in a way it's going to be connective to the other person rather than something which is going to be exploitive of the other person, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And especially in, like, for example, a marriage, like if two people are sort of treating each other as an I it rather than an I you, then
Mhm.
that can cause obviously problems, and it's might be destructive. But how about if, let's say, if a person has the I you relationship with other people, won't that entice more feelings of lust? Or is that not something that should be done? Should you have an I-it relationship outside of marriage and keep the I-you relationship into the marriage?
Well, yeah, well, I don't think so because it's not a fair way to treat other people, right? I mean,
Mm.
when you're, it, you don't want it, nobody wants to be treated like an ant. But what you can do is realize that that's not good for it's not good for the other person. It's not good for you, right? It's, you know, it's interesting. Um, they did, they did a study a few years ago. There was a lot of difficulties um, I think it was in Detroit. I could be wrong. I think it was Detroit, in the United States, between police and local people. And they wanted local people and the police to get to know each other. So they went to a team of scientists, social scientists, and they said, like, what can we do? And they said, well, we'll devise some questions that people can use to get to know each other, right? So they divide, I think it's 33 questions or 32 questions. And uh, that increase in intimacy over time. And they found that when they did this, that people had very positive feelings about the other person after doing these 33 questions. So then they thought, I wonder if this would work for dating, right? Wonder if this would. So they started to do this with couples, and they found that they were falling in love, right? And they came up with this idea that there are 30, if you do these 33 questions with anybody, you will fall in love with them. Well, only because it means like it's not like you fall in love with them, it's you get to know them. And that's a very different thing than lust. I think part of it is disconnecting, you know, disconnecting those kind of physical impulses from being able to see the person in front of you. See, part of what happens with lust is that you take a person and you make them into an object of your feeling, an object of uh, of your desire, instead of saying, okay, here's a person with with their needs and their life and their right, and not pushing, not pushing your desires on them. So I think that the more you see people as real people, uh, you may have affection for them and you'll appreciate them and enjoy them, uh, but but doesn't necessarily have to turn in does and shouldn't turn into lust. I think. I think. Um,
Well, yeah, I don't know. I think lust can be a good thing if we choose to lust after something that's real. I think the problem with lust is when we chase after things that are a delusion or a deception, and sometimes our mind plays tricks on us, and people get tempted into chasing after things which they believe is real, perhaps, and they do it and they chase after and they get there and they realize actually it doesn't give them true happiness. This isn't what they thought it would be. It causes more destruction. Um, it brings maybe a brief satisfaction or pleasure, but then it doesn't last. And then it brings a lot of pain and suffering. Um, or you just think, well, I'll just chase after more and more and more, and it gets addictive, and then you get sort of trapped into that addiction, and then you lose control over your emotions, and everything just falls apart once you lose that control. So it's like
well,
it's a danger.
like everything else, excuse me, like everything else, it's you know our our desires in general, so this is for food and everything else, kind of tie into the dopamine system, right?
Yeah, it's all like lust, isn't it? All desires are like a type of
Right,
lust.
there, right. It's all related. It's all related to each other, and all of them are based on a kind of desire for a reward, right? And our brain gives us the reward, right? It's kind of it's a system that's built into us, um, and so, you know, we we
I
do a
think
certain action and we get a dopamine rush, right? We get a shot of dopamine, and of course it is, and it's on the same receptors, right? So the dopamine is taken up on the same receptors as heroin and other opiates. So
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 it's really enticing and it's
right,
so
and the
the
addiction
amount.
is real, right? I mean, it's a literal addiction, right? It's a literal addiction. So what happens is we can become addicted to certain feelings. And that's very challenging. Now, the only way to deal with that
Mm.
is the only way to deal with that sometimes is to break uh, is 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 to break the chain, right? If you're able to interrupt thought, right? If you're able to interrupt thought so you're not triggering that chain of things, which is now going to which is now going to give you that shot of dopamine, right? If you're able to do that, that's why you have these kind of instructions about, about lowering your eyes and things like this, because what you're doing is you're avoiding at some point in the chain that kind of starts, kind of starts
Like
from
a
that.
path. Yeah, it's
Right.
like a path. It's like a path to destruction. And actually, you've got to get off the path and not allow yourself to even start that path, I think, because it's one of those things that once you go, it's so easy it's so difficult to come out of that. So I would advise that things like alcohol, drugs, anything that sort of affects our ability to cut that chain of thought, and to stop it, or to if we lose control of our
For sure.
desires, anything which causes that to
For
happen, it's
sure.
best to stay away from, getting drunk or taking intoxicants, anything that clouds our ability to judge right from wrong. Avoiding situations where that these that your desires will be sort of you'd be tempted. So tempting situations where there's like lewdness or, temptations really. I think it's I'm not saying completely avoid it. You have to get out of bed in the morning and, go to work and things
Right.
like that. You can't completely avoid it. You've got to do a certain amount of expose yourself, to a point in order to be able to get on with your life and do what your mission is.
Right.
But I think holding on to God and remembering God as much as possible. And actually, I think my biggest advice is we have to accept that this is a huge thing to be able to control. And
Yeah.
it reminds me of the prophet Yusuf in the Quran,
Mhm.
and he was in the room and he with Pharaoh's wife, no, as Al-Aziz's wife, and
Mhm.
he was tempted. It doesn't actually, it reveals in the Quran, I think it's the same in the Bible as well, that actually he was tempted and
Yes.
he actually prayed to God and said, without your mercy, I will fail this test. Like he was so close to not being able to resist. And then he ran to the door and, tried to get away and it all went from there. But he did resist by the help of God, with the help of God. And
It,
I think maybe when that's missing, if we have if our relationship with God is missing, then we're bound to fail, really.
I had
So I think we have to hold on to our Creator, because if a prophet, struggled with it,
yeah,
and we're certainly going to struggle with it.
yeah. And
And
we always call him Yosef HaTzadik, right?
yeah,
Yosef, the righteous
right,
one. And
yeah,
like, okay, why is he called the righteous one? Ask
because he
anybody,
was,
because he resisted the wife. So like, you think to yourself, wait a second. I had an experience once. I was in a little village in South India, and there was the grave of a Sufi saint. And um, and I went to this grave. I went to this grave, and there were a bunch of people gathered around me. I was the only white guy. I speak Tamils. They thought, oh, it's very exciting. So they started to tell me stories about this saint that was buried there. And one of them said, he says he was reading Quran once, and a mouse came, and a mouse died right in front of him, and he tapped the mouse on the head, and the mouse came alive, and everybody went, oh. And then somebody said, that's nothing. He says one time there was a cat and he was reading Quran and the cat came and the cat died and he tapped the cat on the head and it came alive. And he said, that's nothing. Somebody else says, that's nothing. He says, one time, says, there was a child who died and they brought the child, he tapped on the head, the child came alive. And it kept going on and it went like this. And one guy, he calls to me, he says, you know what? He says, everything these people are saying, I don't know if it's true or not. He says, but I know one thing. He says, I knew the man for 50 years and he never looked at a woman with lust. right?
Mm.
He said, and I remember like, and I remember that his thinking was like, you know what? Raise people from the dead. Anybody could do that. Like, yeah, okay, maybe anybody could do that. But if a person could control that, that's really impressive. That's you want to hear something impressive, that's something impressive. Because it really is, it's so built into us. And of course it is a creative energy, right? I mean, it is the source, it is a creative energy. It's a source of I mean, it's related to our creativity in terms of artistic creativity, um, building the world and all that. It's a
Right, building the world. You're right, because it reminds, sorry to interrupt, but it just, I know I'll forget to say it otherwise. I think it's actually a huge part of who we are. And I feel like it's there for a purpose. Obviously, everything's there for a purpose. But, the way that lust breaks down relationships between a husband and a wife, when people go astray or look elsewhere and they lose control of that. I think it's the same with our relationship with God. It's similar to our relationship with God. God wants us to remain loyal to Him, to remain um, devoutly, you know, loyal to Him. And man, as in mankind, people, because of our lusts and our desires, we we look elsewhere sometimes and we forget and we lose that ability to sort of completely be faithful to our creator. Sometimes, it's just part of we forget, we lapse. It's part of who we are. But I think through that we create evil. We create evil, and God is just there like waiting for us to come back to him. And a beautiful thing that our lust can teach us is that we sin, because it's because of our lust that we sin. And then it teaches us how forgiving and merciful our Creator is. So it makes us want to go back. And then the relationships is even more beautiful than before. So I think that's a good thing about it. Like,
yeah.
that sounds really, I'm always trying to put a positive note on all these things. I think with all of our desires and lust and things like that, I think obviously it can cause a huge amount of destruction. And, but there is wisdom in there, and I think we can use it in a good way. So let's say if somebody has fallen, just like we fell out of, Garden of Eden because of perhaps lust or our desire
Mhm.
to to seek that which is forbidden.
Mhm.
And so that state of being fallen, I think there's what it teaches us is we can then transform it by channeling that lust into our creator, so we can choose to actually desire God and desire his pleasure and desire seeking his pleasure in everything we do. And that is a beautiful type of
There are people who are enthusiastic, passionate lovers of God, right? I mean, and that's
exactly, and,
you know
and
that
that's lust, isn't it?
yeah, and that is it is. I mean, there are people who really have uh, you you think about I see sometimes when people go to prayers, no offense, people go to prayer, they're walking slow, right? They're walking slow. And no, it's like, okay, I have to go to prayers. Okay, I'm walking slow and I'm distracted, whatever. But you see a person who was running to, a person, right? They're running fast, right? They're running fast and their energies are into it, whatever, right? And I think that we can learn from that. I mean, we can learn from that we have to use that energy, right? That kind of
The
energy, that
passion
kind
you
of
can
desire,
transform.
passion, right?
Yeah.
The passion shouldn't be just and again also in the marriage, nobody says a marriage should not be passionless, not at all, right? Of course not, right? I mean, so that's a place, that God has given us a vessel, a place, for us to be able to be passionate. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be passionate.
Yeah,
It's
and
a
I think
place for it.
sometimes we get confused that there's, people who try to completely get rid of their lust. They think it's a completely bad thing. And as you said, you maybe try and remain celibate and stuff. But actually, is that even possible? Like, is that what God wants from us? I don't think it is. I think
I,
like you said, it's better to channel it appropriately into a vessel
yeah, I
in a
think there are
healthy way,
people,
but maybe
I
it
think there are
does.
people for whom that really works. I mean, I feel like that is a path for some people.
Yeah, yeah, I think it probably is as
We call
well.
them Perushim, people there's some people who are kind of naturally ascetic, um, and it works well for them. It works well for them. Um, but for most people, I think for most people it's not a good option. And like, no offense to the Catholic Church, but I think we've seen that it can be a very unhealthy option,
Mhm.
right? Because repressing, right, repressing sexuality doesn't work so great. It just doesn't. It just channeling it and transforming it is possible, but just to repress it almost never works.
So this is
And
why we're calling these sessions riding the beast.
yes,
No,
yeah, well,
actually, I think you can jump on the back of the beast and actually use the beast to take
right.
you somewhere good.
Yeah, but it's also part of it is to understand that there's the Baal Shem Tov made a very nice observation. Um, there's in the Torah there's a whole list of inappropriate relationships, and one of them it says you're not allowed to. I think it was marry your sister or something like that, and it said "Ki chesed hu" because it's a kindness. I'm like, what's that mean? So the Baal Shem Tov said, he says, look, you have to understand that every negative quality is a distorted version of a positive quality. And he says lust is a distortion of the desire to give,
Yeah.
right? A person wants to give. And they don't know how, they don't know how, they don't have a channel, they just want to give, 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 and that turns into a kind of lust. So
Is
if
that
you
why
know
men?
that,
Mm,
then you say, well, so okay, so then how do I give appropriately? How do I give in a way that's received in a healthy way rather than, in this other way? But to
well,
understand that there's underneath what
mm,
is even seems to be a negative
yeah,
quality is a positive quality.
I think you're right. And I think that's why men probably struggle more with lust on the whole than women, because they're, like you said, more the masculine energy is the giver
Right.
and the feminine energy is like the receiver. So perhaps men, from their urge to give spiritually, that reflects in a physical way because that's, yeah. And then, but it can get confusing. And
Right. And they don't have a spiritual way. They don't have a spiritual way to do it. And so it becomes all
why
it
don't they
becomes
have a
all of
spiritual way
the
to do it? Can we
the
create a
thing-
spiritual channel
a
for
lot of
it?
people just don't, just don't have that kind of training, right? They don't have those kind of opportunities, right? They just live in a secular world and they have that desire, but they don't know that there's no place to put it, right? And then if you live in a pornified world, right? It says, well, what are you supposed to do? Well, this is what you're supposed to do. This is what the world's supposed to look like.
And I think that's the trick, isn't it? This world is like we're full of there's porn everywhere. There's all these
Yeah, now it's right.
lewd where it's so difficult. But I think there's such a good point because you said that there's no way of men giving giving spiritually, and that's why they do it physically, and that can be destructive. So how can we create a channel for men to give spiritually to
No. So no, first of all, I think that marriage and family is probably the key way, but but also by helping other people, by giving charity. I mean, all these things,
Yeah.
right? All these things, there are millions of ways. There's millions of ways to give and to be engaged with the world and to be, you know, and to be doing.
So what
Um,
you're saying is instead of trying to plant the physical seed in that sense by trying to
right,
spread the seed, then why don't we try to spiritually plant seeds of love
right.
and kindness into people's hearts by doing good deeds, giving to charity, um, praying for people is a type of giving, I guess. And
Because you're taking the giving energy and you're elevating it and you're using it, right? Not, and not investing it. Literally think about it as like you have, you know, you can take this energy and you can invest it here, you can invest it there, right? So why not invest it? Why not invest it in your, in the good of the world and your eternal future, as opposed to the bad of the world and your eternal damnation,
that's
right?
it. I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's choosing. You've got that lust. You can either choose to invest it in the immediate gratification, the temporary physical pleasures, or in a more eternal peace and blessing and
And the bad
death
news is you're
and
going to
life.
fail a lot.
Yes, and don't give up.
Yeah, don't give up. No, really, I think that's the most. I have to make sure that we make sure that we give the most important message of all. The most important message of all is, it is difficult, and it's very difficult. And when you fail, don't give up, right? Don't give up on yourself and say,
And
"Oh,
remember that God is most compassionate and most forgiving and most merciful. And actually, I think, we all have to have compassion on each other. And really, ultimately, our aim should be unconditional love. Just like, God loves us unconditionally, we should love one another unconditionally and and accept that everybody struggles with this. It's not an easy thing.
yeah." And when you
It's
mess up, judge yourself, sentence yourself to a second chance, and start over again. And don't think that you don't deserve a second chance. You deserve a second chance, and start over again. And even if it's all the way from the beginning, right? Even if you really screw up, sometimes happens, right? You start over, and and uh, with the help of God, and always ask the help of God. You know,
always.
this is not really always ask the help of God. If Joseph can ask for the help of God, you can too. Okay, so ask for the help of God, and and do your best, and hopefully we'll all be able to elevate this beautiful part of us. It is a beautiful part of us. At the end of the day, it's a source of incredible energy and beauty and art and all sorts of great things, and we should be able to elevate it so that it's good for us and good for the world.
And worship our Creator and to the best of our abilities. Amen.
And the second most important thing is make sure to subscribe and like the video.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Wiseman. God bless
You're
you for
welcome. God
sharing
bless you.
lovely speaking to you. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Peace and blessings, everybody, and see you again hopefully next week. Thank you. Bye.